the person that I was seeing at the time said, "Dave, I just don't feel heard." And that made me sit back and think and really dig deep and become more introspective than I ever have been before in my life. And I really wanted to understand what that meant to me. Okay, rejection is redirection. Oftentimes, relationships ending is a great opportunity for receiving feedback and being open to the opportunity of receiving that feedback as well. So I took it and I ran with it, and I started to understand that when somebody doesn't feel heard in a relationship, it's because I was lacking empathy myself. Showing empathy for others is a very vulnerable thing because it requires communication and a whole lot of humility. What do I mean by that? Showing empathy for somebody else shows a lot of humility on your part because you're setting aside what you feel in the moment to understand what somebody else is going through and putting yourself in their shoes. So briefly, before we get into the rest of today's episode, let me just clarify on what empathy is technically, and then expand a little bit more on how empathy can show up in our communication with others and in our relationships. So what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to understand another person's thoughts and feelings in a situation from their point of view rather than your own. It differs from sympathy, where one is moved by the thoughts and feelings of another, but maintains an emotional distance. Let me just share with you, I was the king of sympathy. Sympathy sounds like, "I'm sorry you're going through that." Empathy may sound more compassionate, as in like, "I can understand why that would be hard for you right now." And note the difference. Like if you were, say, on a Friday afternoon, you had just lost your job and you call up a friend of yours and you're feeling a little bit upset. You are kind of in panic mode after a hectic week, and you don't know what to do in the future. And the person that you call says something like, "Don't worry, you'll find another soon. And besides, you knew your company was having financial problems. Didn't you expect this? And why are you so upset right now?" What would you feel if that's what you heard on the other end of the phone call? You may actually not be able to turn to that person in the future, and you may not be able to rely on them as a friend or as a go-to for support in the future. So imagine what that can do in a relationship. So empathy is a big concept, and it's certainly something that's been researched by Brene Brown, Daniel Goleman, and Paul Ekman. And so Goleman and Ekman have identified 3 components of empathy. There's cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. And when you learn how to empathize with friends, coworkers, and those around you, and those that you're in relationship with, when you use these 3 types of empathy, you can build stronger relationships through trust. So cognitive empathy is defined by simply knowing how the other person feels and what they might be thinking, sometimes called perspective taking. Your friend that you called up could imagine themselves being in your shoes when losing a job. They know that you're feeling sad, but they're having some things come up in their own world that's preventing them from showing empathy and showing sympathy instead. So, however, having only cognitive empathy keeps us at a distance from our closest relationships. And to truly connect with somebody, you need to be able to share their feelings. And this is where emotional empathy comes up. Emotional empathy can be described as when you feel physically along with the other person as though their emotions were contagious. And this is probably what you hear most of the time when somebody says that they're an empath. I feel other people's feelings so deeply that they almost become my own. And this type of empathy can also extend to physical sensation. In this particular case with emotional empathy, you might look inwards to identify a situation where you were feeling something similar. And what's ultimately important is that the emotions that one person feels while the other person is going through a situation, they're the same. So when it comes to emotional empathy, you've successfully understood what the other person is feeling, and you put yourself in a similar emotional space. And as a result, you can take the insights you've understood from cognitive and emotional empathy in order to have compassionate empathy. This kind of empathy, we not only understand a person's predicament and feel with them, but are spontaneously moved to help if needed.